Good morning once again. So this is 415 Development and Growth 1, perhaps the 7th lecture. So today I'm going to start with a quick review of what we have done so far. We started this semester by discussing what is economic development. Right? This is okay. We discussed that. Here we paid particular attention to objectives and values, right? And we discussed at some length the sense approach or Amartya Sen's approach, right? Then, so this is basically chapter 1 and chapter 2, right? So this was the introduction. Then we look at 4 classical theories, okay? Now here, what I want to stress is that, so this classification is based on some historical, progress, right? So first we discussed Rostov and Herdoma views. Okay, so here the idea is basically capital accumulation, right? Then we looked at Lewis's theory. Here the idea is basically about surplus labor. Okay, then we looked at international dependence. Okay, so basically here, the catchphrase is Marxian or global capitalism. Okay, so this is check, and today we're going to look at market fundamentalism. Okay, here the phrase is Washington Consensus. Okay, now after that, after we finish this part, we're going to look at modern theories. Now, some of those modern theories will have some historical roots. So typically, so this is like 50s and 60s, all right? This is 70s, and this is largely an endeavor of the market fundamentalism is basically has basically developed in 80s, right? Then after your midterm, we start going to look at modern theories. Okay, now those modern theories we will have a couple of them. Okay, and there will be also some historical roots. So what Krugman calls high development theory. Okay, so this is basically so names are Rosenstein, Rodan, Rosenstein, Rodan, Hirschman, Myrdal, and people like this. So these high development theorists had some ideas, had some very important ideas that will that will motivate the modern theories. Okay, so these ideas are coordination failures, multiple equilibria, okay, dynamic complementarities, cumulative causation, and some others. Okay, so we're gonna discuss each of these things, and we're gonna associate them with some classical historical work. So this work started in late 30s and early 50s. Okay, so in many texts, these are defined. These people are defined as, you know, are grouped into development economists, and we discuss all of this in chapter 4. Okay, we're gonna discuss all this in chapter 4. At the very end of the semester, we're gonna look at several issues, okay, from various chapters. One thing we're gonna look at, for instance, is human capital. All right, another thing is measurement of poverty. Measurement of poverty. Another thing is rural-urban migration. Another thing that we are going to look at is gender inequality. Okay, things like these will be covered at the end. All right. So that's the overview of where we are now. Okay, and let me now share my slides with you. Okay, so this is section 3.4, the neoclassical counter-revolution or market fundamentalism. Okay, so the outline here is, first we're going to look at three different approaches. All of them are based on standard neoclassical or free market economy. All right. According to, you know, with respect to how severely they're against the statist model, differs. All right, but typically they're all based on these same principles. Okay. Then I will show you very briefly what the traditional neoclassical growth theory tells us and how it motivates these market fundamentalist views. All right. When we say Washington consensus, what we basically mean is that the institutions, the institutions of the global capitalism that promoted such market fundamentalism are basically based on Washington, D.C. There are two big players, International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the World Bank, right? So these institutions are sometimes called post-Bretton Woods era institutions as well. So we discuss their role in the upcoming slides. So the idea is that for some good or not very good reasons, okay, someone is joining as well. Some economists promoted this idea or defended this idea that the government is possibly doing too much. Government is violating the free market principles, and for this reason, some countries remain underdeveloped. Some countries do not actually realize their true potential in economic development. All right. So this was, of course, entirely different. This was against the idea of states' involvement in development policy and programs, right? Why? There's this interdependence, international dependence school in 70s that said there is underdevelopment because of global capitalism, right? Because workers everywhere, especially in the periphery countries, they are exploited by these capitalist class all across the world. So state should do something about it. Central planning is the key, or a socialist revolution is the key. Now, these market fundamentalists are strictly opposed to that idea, of course. And in 80s, we really observe that these ideas, these market fundamentalist ideas, found some practical opportunities. Through what? Through the conservative governments. Most typically in US and UK. In US, the President Ronald Reagan was a strong defender of this new revolution. In the UK, the Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, the Iron Maiden, was really, really fond of these theories. In Canada as well, in some other countries as well, but in Turkey as well, right? In Turkey, after January 24 Pact, and after the coup, right, 1980 coup, there was this Özal governments. Turgut Özal is a former planning specialist, right? He became the prime minister. Anavatan Partisi, as you know, his party was called Anavatan Partisi, and he became the prime minister of the country under the new constitution, 1982 constitution. And in those countries, the market fundamentalist idea was typically represented by three things, right? First, supply side macroeconomic policies. Now, why is that different from the earlier thing? In the earlier era, most of the macroeconomic policy was oriented towards demand side, right? Because it was the Keynesian revolution after 40s and 50s. It was the time of the Keynesian revolution. So if there's a macroeconomic stabilization policy, it is basically demand-based. Now, of course, that idea was also challenged by the real events in the global macroeconomy, right? So basically, it was the oil shocks. The first oil shock in 1973, the second oil shock in 1979. So those created the notion that, wait, yes, we can manage demand, manage aggregate demand using Keynesian policies, or more generally, either fiscal policies or monetary policies, but that is not enough. When does it fail? Well, those demand management policies fail if the economy is hit by a supply shock, right? So what we can do and we should do then, according to these ideas, we should focus on the supply side, and we should make we should remove the frictions in the supply side of the economy so that production is larger for any price level. Okay, production becomes larger for any price level. Okay, now strongly associated with these views, of course, is rational expectations macroeconomics, right? Why? Because in those economies, once people have rational expectations, they're going to anticipate the government policies. So governments can affect the real economy only if they can create policy surprises. All right. So people like Bob Lucas, Ed Prescott, Tom Sargent. So these economists created this new macroeconomic theories, which is sometimes called new classical, right? So their theories basically defended the notion that markets are inherently stable. Okay, so if the government does not really involve with too much economic activity, then markets can correct themselves because people are rational, and if the government is able to solve the efficiency problems, if markets are deregulated, okay, if government plays only the minimum role or the minor the minimum role in the economy, then markets will correct themselves and efficient results will obtain. Okay. Now the third important aspect is privatization. All right, because in many developing countries, even today, there are many state-owned companies. In Turkey, for instance, we call them KITs, kamu iktisadi teşebbüsleri, right? So in many countries, then the reform agenda told us that, okay, you're going to sell these public companies to the private sector. Why? Because private sector uses the resources more efficiently, which may be true or which may not be true, depending on the historical context, depending on the economy, depending on the particular state-owned company. But that was the idea. All right. So the principle is this: so government uses somebody else's money or somebody else's resources for somebody else, right? So they don't really have to feel they have to be efficient in this resource allocation or resource use. But according to this view, this market fundamentals view, private agents, once they own these firms, this becomes their resource, so they use those resources for their own profit. All right. For this reason, they efficiently manage these resources, because at the end, if they do not make efficient choices, if they do not make optimal choices for efficiency, then it is their own profit that would be lower. So that was the idea. Pretty basic, as you see, because first you have to believe that markets are inherently stable. So if you leave the markets be, if markets be free, then competition in these markets will result in efficient outcomes. All right. Once you truly believe that, then of course you have these reform agenda, and again, on the historical side, we have World Bank and International Monetary Fund. So some neoclassical minds were employed there. Okay, they found employment there, so they promoted this type of reform agenda for many underdeveloped or developing countries, including Turkey. All right. That type of market fundamentalism also supported by things such as, for instance, Hacettepe theory, right? So liberalize your trade regime, decrease tariffs, so open your economy to international competition, right? And then also make your national currency convertible so that people can come to your country and buy your assets. So integration with the world economy, and when we say world economy, of course, what we mean here is that global capitalist economy. Okay, so that would have certain benefits to your country, because if you have saving gaps, if you do not have sufficient funds to invest, then you would need foreign capital to fly to your country and open factories and create employment, basically. All right. So that was the overall view, and as you see, it is exactly the contrary to the international dependence school, right? Because international dependence school tells you that, all right, the problem you are facing is precisely the global capitalism. So you should protect your economy and you should protect your workers from such exploitative practices, right? Now, these market fundamentalists tell you exactly the different thing, exactly the opposite thing. You should open your economy, liberalize your trade regime, sell the public-owned companies, and let the markets be. Okay. Central argument again, if I read it, underdevelopment is because resource allocation is badly managed by the government. Why? Because states intervene with the markets, with with minimum prices or maximum prices, with fixed exchange rate regimes. So they pin down relative prices, and those relative prices now reflect not the market forces, right? In a free market economy, under perfect competition, if you create minimum price effects or maximum price effects, or if you intervene with the exchange rate regime, if you peg the interest rate or the exchange rate, then you create some inefficiency. All right? Then you do not let the market to invest where the return is the maximum for the private sector. Okay? You protect some sectors in the economy too much, right? Etc. So once there's too much state intervention, then according to this view, then the result is underdevelopment. So what is called a free market? So the system whereby prices of commodities or services freely rise or fall when the buyer's demand for them rises or falls, or the seller's supply of them decreases or increases, right? So this is typically what the free market is. This doesn't really tell you how efficient that market is, right? So in some markets, demand is not that elastic. In some markets, supply is not that elastic. All right. So this is generally true. This is just a definition, but in reality, things are of course different. Now, as I said, there are three approaches. One is the free market analysis, the other is public choice theory, and the other is more market-friendly approaches to understanding underdevelopment, right? So in the free market analysis, we have basically three principles. Laissez-faire, let them what they want to do, right? Invisible hand, so there is this magical thing. If everybody maximizes his or her own benefit without any intervention by the market, by the state, then that would result in efficient outcomes. Okay? Efficient in what sense? Efficient in Pareto sense. All right, so you will not make somebody better off without making someone worse off. Okay? So obviously, this type of efficiency and free market analysis will have some roots in classical thinking, right? Classical theories such as those of Adam Smith, David Ricardo, etc. And also the neoclassical or the marginalist revolution, what we typically associate with Walras, Jevons, to some extent Marshall, obviously. So those ideas, once they are applied to modern economies in 1980s, they realize that these market fundamentalists realize that, okay, government is doing too much. There should not be any violation of the free market system. And without any violation or state intervention, then markets will operate competitively, and free market competition eventually results in efficient investments, correct prices, etc. And this is like a Benthamist view of utility, right? So everybody will behave according to his or her own benefit, and that would be eventually good for the entire society. Now, the second approach is public choice theory. you know, when we say political economy, we basically refer to Smith, Ricardo, Marx, Malthus, Mill, right? Those people. So those were political economists, the earliest political economists, right? When we say public choice theory today, what we mean is new political economy, right? Because in the second half of the 20th century, economists developed new political economy models, all right? So in those models, people behave in ways they behave because they are looking for self-interest, and they sometimes are their preferences are sometimes subject to rent seeking, and for these reasons, we must understand how institutions operate in a capitalist economy, right? Because when we call, okay, state should intervene, right? When we say when we put this idea in you know, when we use this notion of state being interventionist in a free market economy, then the question is, who is state? What is a state, right? What is a government? Well, those are people, right? The politicians, the bureaucrats, technocrats, and those people are, of course, I mean, they want to maximize their own utility, maximize their own payoffs. So in most of the time, they look for some rents that they will obtain just because they have this position, they have this power of, you know, execution, basically, right? So once they have executive power, this new political economy approach tells us that those people are not just saints, like they are just people, and whenever they find it optimal and feasible, they can actually exploit public resources. So as citizens, we must aware of this problem, right? We must aware of the possibility that those appointed bureaucrats or politicians can use their de facto political powers or de facto technological powers, bureaucratical powers, to maximize their own profit by using public resources. All right? So then there's corruption, there is again rent seeking, and sometimes they can confiscate private property, obviously, right? If there is no rule of law in a country, then some people can obtain, can capture, to be more specific, these resources, and then of course, too much government involvement, giving too much power to government, results in inefficient outcomes. Okay, because we cannot accept, we cannot basically assume that governments are always benevolent. Governments are always thinking of the citizens' utility or welfare. All right, and if you look at world economic history or world political history, you see many examples where governments are doing very nasty things to their own people. Okay. Now the third approach is not that radical, but they say, okay, there are market failures, okay, and government's role is to minimize the effects of these failures. All right. So it doesn't tell us that, so this more market-friendly approach does not tell us that government should not intervene with the economy. No, government can and should intervene. So there could be some interventions and some policies and some regulation, but those must be targeted to only the sectors or the problems where markets fail. Right? And market failure basically results in, is basically caused by a couple of things. One is public goods. So if there is a pure public good out there, most of the time, private sector will not provide the efficient outcome. For instance, in education, in health, these are open to discussion, whether these are pure public goods or not, not necessarily pure public goods. But for instance, national defense is a typical example of a public good where state is not entirely giving up its powers. All right. Environment is one other thing, because if government does not regulate the private sector activity in terms of, for instance, carbon dioxide emissions, then we would see even larger, perhaps, emission levels. All right, but government intervenes in that particular area, operates some carbon tax, so firms cannot be entirely freely carbon dioxide emitters. Okay. So public goods. Another thing is asymmetric information. Okay, if some agents have more information relative to some other agents, then that could result in inefficient outcomes. You may imagine many different sectors for this regard. Insurance in general, a problem where we observe such differences in information, right? Buyers have usually less information than sellers. Most of the time, policymaker agents have more information than the public. And there are things like that. And also we have externalities, right? There are positive externalities and negative externalities. So government, if there's some room for government intervention, then that would target to eliminate negative externalities and benefit from the positive externalities, right? Because if any type of externalities are present, then entirely free market outcome will not be socially optimal, right? You know this from your public economics lectures. So these are the reasons why markets are sometimes failing. And this market-friendly approach, which is not very stark in terms of government intervention, just tells us that, okay, government should intervene, but that intervention must be limited and only be targeted at the sectors or the problems where the markets fail. All right. Now, traditional neoclassical growth theory is summarized here. And most of the stuff that we discussed in this lecture is motivated by this, right? So there is this aggregate production activity. If we let this economy freely operate without government intervention, then a higher investment rate and the lower population growth rate will eventually give us a rich economy. All right. So in that model, there is no room for market failure. Okay. There's no room for government intervention. Why? Because all markets are assumed to be perfectly competitive. There is no public good. There is no externalities. There is no missing markets. There is no asymmetric information. Everybody knows everything. All markets are perfectly competitive. Workers supply labor, capital owners supply capital, firms put together these resources and create efficient outcomes. All right? But this theory is, of course, limited in many different grounds. Now, we have less than a minute. There will be conversion, so let's meet at 10:45. Is that good for everybody? 10:45. All right. So let's meet at 10:45 for our third meeting.
Okay.
Okay, bye-bye.